Greetings, everyone. I'm pretty stoked today to talk about Terrence Howard, and you all know the famous actor, right?
It's like all my days, I've been hearing this beat in my head, man. Like a pounding, but then sometimes, man, it get real soft. Man, it's like I can't be stopped.
And he has been talking about, and finally now after 45, 50 years, and as he says, lifetimes of working on this, has come out with some pretty incredible, groundbreaking, universal puzzle solving, life changing, reality altering information. And I had chills whenever I was listening to this, and I've done a real deep dive.
But it'll show you the flower of life. And we are part of that, so we are the creator.
In the last 10 days on everything that Terrence is sharing. And, he shares the story of when, before he was born, he woke up in the womb and, with remember. And then he'd fall back asleep, and then he'd wake up again, remember. And, well, let him tell that story.
My first memory was almost like when you're dreaming and you're falling and you hit the bottom and you wake up. Mm-hmm. That was my first memory, but I didn't wake up here. I was inside my mother's womb. And I was about maybe 6 months inside the womb. And I'm like, okay, don't forget I'm here. Okay. Don't forget. You go to sleep. You wake up again. Now something's moving in front of you. And you're like, oh, that's my friend. But I had a different name for it. I didn't know it was my hand. But I knew I had a title for it. Go back to sleep, all of those things. Then ultimately you get ready to come out. I remember all of that.
You remember coming out?
Remember being compressed, and you want to panic, but you're flooded with like some serotonin and dopamine to where you feel relaxed. You go right back to sleep. You remember being born. I remember being circumcised. I remember the whole nine. And the proof of it was when my wife, Mira, that you just met, when she was 6 months pregnant with my son, Kieran, I wanted to prove to her what I was talking about. So I put a light on her stomach every day at 6 o'clock at night. And I would move that light back and forth, and I'd put a song on for a week straight. On Saturday, after a week, I didn't put the light there, and I didn't do the music. And he pushed up on her stomach. And then when I put the light there, he started following the light. And for the next 2 months, we did this every night, and he would go all the way around her belly, back and forth, always pushing on it. I didn't understand at the time that maybe I've interfered with the development process, and maybe he's wrapped the cord around his neck. I shouldn't have done all of this, but it came out wonderful and fine. And this little boy, first thing he wanted to do is see light. He loved lights from that early stage, and I can ask him the square root of 2, the square root of 5, the square root of that, the square root of pi, and he will run it off. But he's just like, his personality is like Forrest Gump, to where he's just loving and wants everybody to be around him and care. But for me, that's where it started, in there. And then when I was about 5 years old, I had another dream, and the room filled up with like this fluid, a dark fluid, and I could see the ripples of it moving around, and there was a being there, and I remember being walked through that fluid with him, and I was trying to look up at him, and I couldn't turn my head to look at him. and he had his hand straight. I knew his voice, but I did not know who it was, but I felt confident and comfortable. And as we moved along this dark blue fluid path with like chartreuse covering the, you know how when you look into a pool and you see the ripples, and if you're at the bottom of the pool, you see the ripples overlapping. That's what it looked like. And then when we got to the end of it, he said to me, if you could have anything in the world, what would it be? Now, we were really poor. My dad had just gotten out of prison, you know, for manslaughter. I didn't have much, but I said to him, I want to know how everything works. And at that moment, he used his left hand and he opened up the door. And there was this mansion, big brown doors. And inside of it was this crystalline flowers, big crystalline flowers, like a giant, like 5 feet across. And every time I tried to see his face, he would reach in and hand me another shape. And I was so fascinated with the shapes because they didn't look like the platonic solids. They didn't look like anything I'd ever seen before.
You know, so he goes on to share that, you know, there are only two components of the universe, the yin and the yang, the male and the female.
Sustainable future, because what I've discovered in the grand unified field equation with discovering the proton, defining the proton, and doing all these things, you've got to remember this is the geometry of hydrogen itself. 99% of the universe is made up of hydrogen. So if we have the template for hydrogen, we have the template for reality and all the things that come with it, and that means life and death. So we can extend this existence. We can heal the diseases. We can heal. We can live till time indefinite, not through praying and God fill us back up and all of that.
Because we need the Lord to fill us up.
Because the truth is, you're going to float off into some spirit realm and do what? You know, that's not what happens. Every element, goes through the transition and comes out the other side. You'll take, all right, I'll do it.
I know, because I
know
you about to go
in the carbon octave. In the carbon octave, you've got you start with your helium, and the neon is on the other side. Okay. Because really, there's only 7 elements, 7 tones for the most part, because all of the elements occur between the pressure conditions of 2 noble gases squeezing on each other. So in the carbon octave, where they squeeze themselves all the way up, you start with lithium, beryllium, boron. Then you have carbon, which is a plus and minus 4. You know, it's both male and female because you're getting hit from both sides. It has a double tone. Then it goes to nitrogen, oxygen, fluorine. Fluorine, it goes through the noble gas. Now fluorine comes out, and now it is sodium. It goes from feminine to masculine. So when you breathing in is a masculine thing, a charging of a system, as Walter Russell said. Breathing out is a feminine expanding of a system, a discharging of the system. You never breathe in twice without breathing out once. So how can you go from, we know this isn't our first lifetime here. We've all felt that we've been here forever. Can you remember not existing?
Right.
Do you remember not being?
No.
But do you think you've been a woman in every lifetime? That wouldn't be fair. But it would make sense if you're masculine male in this lifetime, the next life you become feminine. You're a woman. Come back to male. Breathing in, breathing out. That equanimity will allow for karma to take place. Whatever I've done to women in this life gets done to me in the next one. Whatever women have done to men in this life gets. And what happens biologically?
That's interesting, though.
What happens biologically? The male's body stop producing the testosterone, produces more estrogen. Start growing boobs, become less aggressive and more understanding. The woman, what is she doing? She's slowly coming up to being more masculine. Start actually growing little beards and all of that stuff. She's the prostate, which is the same exact tissue that is in the uterus. When the testosterone level drops, guess what? The estrogen level rises. The prostate, what does the uterus do every month? It sheds. It grows and it sheds. So what happens to the prostate? It starts trying to swell. Because it's being influenced by the estrogen. The testes go back up and become ovaries. The ovaries drop down and become testes. It's just a cycle of going, breathing in, breathing out. The universal breath. And understanding that it brings us back to a balance. So I'm like, you want a transgender? Just wait. In a couple of years, in the next life, you're going to be exactly what you want.
I can't.
You're going to get there.
Same way.
Fulfill your role that you're here. Fulfill the role that you were placed here to fulfill. Do that job, get it done, and you move to the next one with the blessing of universal purpose.
Right? And when we look at the universal laws, right, or the Hermetic laws, the Hermetic principles, we talk about the law of correspondence: as above, so below, so within, so without. As within, so without. And these Hermetic principles and these universal laws and the laws of physics, which he again shares, are we expect them to break down.
Let's talk about our fundamentals are a little bit off. There are no straight lines.
Right.
So I reached out to Neil deGrasse Tyson. I saw him at an event up front, at Fox. And he was like, hey, man, yeah, I'd love for you to come on my show, do my radio, do my TV thing. I would love that. I was like, yeah, but I've got something I want to introduce to you. And it was only 36 pages. It was a treatise. And I told him it was controversial, and I sent him over the 36-page thing that had the wave conjugations in it, but I started it off with 1 × 1 = 2. And he went in on my treatise, redlined everything. He attacked that I had talked about Walter Russell and Victor Schauberger and John Keeley and Tesla as the people that I looked up to. Mm-hmm. He attacked them, but then he started attacking, the 1 × 1 = 2.
How did he attack them?
Oh, he was because I asked him. I said, under what conditions? I said it's illogical where the square root of a number added to itself will equal more than that number squared. But that's what happens with the square root of 2. That's what happens with most of the numbers. I was like, how is it that multiplication, if it means to make more and increase in number, how is 1 × 1 = 1 part of the multiplication table? Now, I understand that if you're seeing it one time,
right?
But we call that once. But the moment that you add the times in there, that multiplicative indicator, that means there's more than 1. So now each equation is supposed to be balanced. That equal sign is supposed to show that there's a balance between these 2 numbers over here and a balance on this one over here. What happened to the other one in this equation? It didn't equate. And then I took the square root of that number. I took the square root of 2, because all this started in 3rd grade. I was arguing with my teacher because we're talking about the square root of
how it creates a loop, and how 1 × 1 cannot equal 1 if it's a multiplication table. And also how 0 times anything, how the anything just disappears. Like how? So he shares a lot of incredibly powerful information.
But our math is still based on a 2-dimensional way. And I think in order for us to reach the future, we have to examine that. Do you guys know about loops in math? Do you believe in loops? Do you know the square root of 2? Do you think that's a loop? Do you believe that the square root of 2 is the square root of 2? Yes or no? Hands up? No? Hello? Oh. I want y'all to take out your phone for a minute then. We're going to do one thing. Everybody got a phone? Put it on the calculator and turn it to the side so you can get all the long numbers out of it. Okay? Now I want you to put in 2 and square root it. 2, hit the square root. You'll get 1.414, 213, 562, 373, 095, ... right? Now I want you guys to do me a favor, cube it. It'll see right over there, it'll be x to the 3. Can y'all do it? Are you cubed it? It'll see 2.828, 4271, 2174, 6190. Now that makes sense. I want you guys to do me a favor, divide it by 2. Get that number? Cube it again. Divide it by 2, cube it again, and I want you to do that until the end of your lives. And that number will still come up with 2.828, 4271, 2174, 6190. Any other number that you, above 2, that you put in and you cube and you square, cube and square and divide by 2, by the 6th operation, it has moved into an exponential number that you can't even imagine. Any number below 2 that you do that same operation with, it will go into an exponentially small matter and number. This is what we call a loop. It is illogical, it doesn't make sense, and it does not make math make sense. So these are some things that I'm bringing to the fore and that I would like to question. I would like to audit the math, the world of mathematics, and I would like to audit how we view the Platonic solids, because I think the new wave conjugations will tell a better story of how our world works. And that's it. It wasn't quite what I thought for, Chris.
Yeah,
but I wanted my pictures. You guys got it. And y'all won't even have time afterwards. But I've spent 45 years searching these things out and trying to figure out what the universe really, how it really worked. And we've come to find that the universe, they are abandoning the standard model, the ideas of black holes and dark matter, for an electric model of the universe that is in response to the Berkeley currents and all these things. It's a better version, a better vision of how we should see the universe. That's how I see it, and I think it should be explored. The identity element, the things that make our math works. Like if I said to you, what's 1 times 1? What'd you say, 1? It equals 1? Now what would Newton say is that? Action times an action. That's a reaction, right? Anybody in here that thinks 1 times 1 equals 1, then you give me 2 pounds and I'll give you a pound back. And we'll call that even, right? Because 1 times 1 equals 1. An unbalanced equation. What we need to do is, the first thing in math is you're supposed to have a balanced equation. 1 times 1 equaling 1 is an unbalanced equation. But the identity element, which is like the Jim Crow laws of the 60s. They say that anything multiplied by 1 becomes that same number as itself. Well, the laws of physics has to break down in order for that to take place. Action and reaction for 1 times 1 to equal 1. In comparison to if I said, what's $1 times $1? Anybody know it's $1? Well, what's a dime times a dime, or 10 pence?
10 pence, yeah.
10 pence times 10 pence? That's a pound, right? 10 pence times 10 pence? Is that right, honey? Yeah, yes. What about 100 pence times 100 pence? That's $1 times, a pound times a pound, right? That's $100, ain't it? What about a quarter? What about 4 quarters times 4 quarters? That's $1, right? That's a pound, right? Well, that's $4. Now, all of these things are legal. The banks can say $1 times $1 is $1 and give you that. Or the banks can say to a friend, $1 times $1 is a quarter times a quarter. It's 4 quarters times 4 quarters, and give that person $4. They can say to another person, $1 times $1 is 100 pence times 100 pence. That person gets $100. So that money is generated. And this is all legal. Do you think it's not happening in the banks? This is what 1 times 1 equaling 1 has got us. This inconsistency of our monies and our economy is sitting in the balance. And the rest of our future is sitting in the balance because our science has been stunted as a result of the problems in mathematics, because math asks for the basic laws of physics to break down in order for 1 times 1 to equal 1. In order for 1 times 0 to equal nothing, laws of conservation of energy has to disappear. And math is the foundating laws of math is supposed to support the laws of physics. They are arm in arm. They cannot be in controversy with each other. So we need an audit on the Platonic solids, we need an audit on the square root of 2, and we need an audit on action and reaction, or we either got to get rid of, we say 1 times 1 equals 1, and there's no action and reaction. One or the other, you can't have both. And until we make that change, we're in trouble. We're going to be stunted as a species.
And he talks about the flower of life, and how, all of, from Da Vinci to Sir Isaac Newton, to Plato, to all of these great thinking minds so long ago were trying to solve this flower of life, and how this symbol is throughout all ancient histories. It's burned onto the various temples and under the food dogs in China as the guardians of the wisdom, of the knowledge. And but he shares that all of these people were trying to solve the flower of life from a two-dimensional perspective. And this is part of his call to remember from the womb and his past lives, and he said he started to understand this at 6 years old and started to solve it.
Now all of our axioms, all of our postulates have been built off of these things. This is what Euclid went down to Egypt and pulled these things together. Pythagoras worked on them, and these were the undisputed fundamentals of God that he used to build. If you tap onto the flower of life, Platonic solids things, it's going to take you to a video. Turn it, don't have to tap it. But it'll show you the flower of life that they took this from. But you'll see that instead of following the natural curvature of these 64 circles overlapping, they averaged the space where they met. And they invented straight lines.
Why did they do that?
Because they believed that the world was flat. They believed the world was flat at the time. And the church promoted. Pythagorean theorem comes off of this cube, a squared plus b squared equals c squared.
So they wanted to use all of these intertwining circles and create straight lines.
Because that's how they thought everything came down to, straight lines. They thought the world was flat. And I was like, oh my goodness. They didn't open the flower properly. So the next one would be the icosahedron.
Now, the flower of life, it's very, very old. The concept is very old. What was the origin of the concept?
It's the oldest symbol known to mankind. It's believed that it was Anki, the brother of Enlil, if you go by the Emerald
Sumerian
tablets,
text.
the Sumerian text, that was the one that created mankind. Because if you look at mankind, and there's a point I want to make with it, I want you to stay on the book, go to 134 on the book. And this is what that other gentleman being told me to do. He said, why don't you just take the pieces that make up the flower and put them together based on universal ratios. So once you're able to pull it up.
164?
Page 134. 134 in the book. So this is the juxtapose of the mistake they made. Yep, just tap right onto that. Yep, just tap on it. Now, this was made by David Johnson, one of our programmers, Argos Fuel. So if you go to the far left and tap on that, I took 4 of those triangles. And wow. And you can scroll around. This is what happens when 4 bubbles meet. This is the negative space where they can't touch each other. This is hydrogen. And as I was saying, electricity is always trying to get to the center of that triangle, but it gets pushed out. And now you see it has 4 contractive poles, which is the electric poles. Just go around it from horizontally, yeah. It has 4 contractive poles because electricity is seeking a higher pressure condition and forcing it in. where magnetism is seeking a lower pressure condition and spun out. So the vortices, those tips, that's the magnetic field. That's where they begin. But it has an equal attractor and an equal amount of repulsion. So if you go to what happens when 8 bubbles meet, they gave me the patents to that. I called that the tetrient. This is
the negative space in between 8 bubbles.
8 bubbles. This is a negative space where 8 bubbles meet, and you can scroll around.
And this is ignored when they're concentrating on straight lines.
Completely, because this, if you look from the top, I haven't violated anything. It fits perfectly inside of there. But this is the negative space where 8 bubbles meet, but you'll notice it has 8 contractive poles, but it only has 6 magnetic poles, 6 vortices, so it has a greater electrical potential than a repulsion. So maybe this is the strong nuclear force, and the previous one was the weak nuclear force. So I was like, okay. I called this the Huntian after my son. So I was like, what happens when 6 bubbles meet? If you'll go to the one right in the center. Now you see that it has these huge bubbles, fast moving, but there's 6 strong spheres that's going around this, but the greater attractor has grabbed the 2 weaker attractors. And this looks just like a photon, and guess what? It has 30 poles. What is the speed of light? 299,752,400 something. They rounded off to 300 million kilometers per second squared. But if you look at it from the top, you'll see that I haven't violated anything. This looks like what happens in nature. So I was like, okay, so they gave me the patents to this, but you'll see that there's 6 unaccounted electrical poles to it. So I was like, what happens when 12 bubbles meet if you go to the one right next to it? Another stable structure that we basically see in nature, but there's 4 unaccounted electrical poles to it. 4 spin around it. You can count those 4. You'll see 1 at the bottom and 3 on those sides. This is the basis of crystallization, laws of crystallization that forms. And you can go to the last one. I was like, what happens when 24 bubbles meet? This is the negative space. If you pull to a horizontal on it, this is a negative space where 24 bubbles meet. This is where you cannot distinguish this from the background because all of the electrical potential has been accounted for. This would be the Bose-Einstein condensate where something becomes indistinguishable from the fabric of space itself, the final state of matter. And the proof of this, the Platonic solids, they have a thing called discrete symmetry. You can put the cubes together, maybe you can put the dodecahedrons together, but you can't put all of them together. But you can take the wave conjugations right here, and they form supersymmetrical systems where everything aligns. So there's a site that James sent over to you. And this will be the final thing, and then I'll be quiet for a second. But because this is this right here. Now these are other sculptures I've built. There's a video, and you'll see that flower. If you'll pop it up from Terry's linchpins that he sent you, you'll see, and this is one of 4 supersymmetrical systems that I patented. And the reason I patented it was because when Walter Russell put his stuff up, just go down a little bit, and we're going to get to gravity. Not that one. We're going to get to gravity in a second. Not that one. We're not even there yet. There, Tetratarian wave conjugations. Now, these are all of those systems put together. This is where 12 bubbles meet, the Aubrians. Mm-hmm. And then I put 5 of them together, and they make these natural starfish. But then when I put 10 of them together, they lay themselves out, and they predict all distribution of matter within the electric field. And you can see where 6 bubbles meet as you get to a higher point on it. Those where 6 bubbles are meeting, still fitting perfectly where the 12 bubbles are meeting and where the 4 and where the 8. That's a super symmetrical system. I put 12, if I put 20 of those where 6 bubbles meet, the Antonians, they make a natural dodecahedron that's naturally curved. If I take where the 12 bubbles meet, that's where I made the linchpin from, ultimately from some of those pieces you got right there, that all shape of it. So that was one of the first things. But when Walter Russell came out with his book and he introduced his periodic table, he watched as different people went up and collected Nobel Prizes for deuterium, for tritium, for all these things that he had discovered. And I was like, okay, let me wait until the patents are granted before I'll talk about it, so that they won't be able to stop it. But what makes more sense? Where they invented straight lines in opening the flower, or where you actually take the individual pieces of the flower and put it together based on universal ratios? Which one do you think is how the givers of that knowledge intended for us to use it?
Well, it makes sense because you're accounting for the next.
And so now he's bringing forth all of this information that, again, he shares is going to, it's our only way forward. Because if we're continuing to move forward on what he calls the lie, then, all of our systems and humanity is doomed to fail. But if we have an open discourse about this new mathematics and these new equations and the fundamental principles of the universe and the laws of physics, and we make these changes, then it's a way for us to up-level civilizations. It's a way for us to move into, a new category of who we are and what we're capable of. And, he, again, just incredible the way his mind works. He holds 97 patents, copyrights, and trademarks on all of this information. And, he's gone into, created or recreated four fields with this information.
Would you say has been the most rewarding out of everything you've done?
The most rewarding thing that's ever happened to me, or that I've accomplished
That you've done.
being able to define the entire electric field, or the plasmic field, and patent it.
Yeah.
And the things that I discovered with that prove that the Platonic solids, which our entire infrastructure is built off, were only averages and approximations, and that all of the postulates and axioms they've built off of are erroneous. And being able to present that, but also being given the blessing of defining the magnetic field, the feminine side, and patenting those, the expansion or the unfolding of the universe. But then being given the opportunity to define the neutral that sits between it, or the constitution, which is the linchpin that mitigates between the micro, which is the electric world, and the macro, which is the magnetic world. And this works as a bridge, a common factor between. So having discovered and patented the grand unified field equation, and putting it into practice and building all of these new industries that have come from it, from transcendental lighting to tangential flight, to in supersymmetrical systems. I've patented 4 supersymmetrical systems.
Check it out. I've got clips to all the videos underneath the video here, and check it out, because it not only will change your perspective on reality if you're open to it, but combined with things like the universal laws or the hermetic principles, depending on what your perspective, but they're known as the hermetics, the seven hermetic principles. When you combined his information and the laws of physics, and he's redefined the periodic table, which I guess was originally done by Walter Russell a long time ago. He's really bringing these things to light, and has the the patents already approved and these new industries, essentially ready to go. But the mainstream narrative and quote unquote scientists, I imagine, because of their funding and all of this other stuff, are not, at least have not been willing to have a discourse with Terrence. So I'm urging for that. I'm urging for you to open your mind to listen to some of this stuff, and I'll even drop a link to Terrence's book, which he's so graciously offered for free in his website, because this information needs to get out, and it's time for us to reevaluate and come out of the lies, and it doesn't matter where those lies stem from, but the lie can't continue forward dressed up as the truth. And it's time for us to have this realization and to really move forward in truth, with the foundation being the fundamental laws that govern this entire universe. Enjoy. Talk to you soon. Peace.